Hi, Lee Phillips. I want to talk to you about the difference between a testamentary trust and a living revocable trust. Now, this isn't a irrevocable trust and a living revocable trust. This is a testamentary trust and a living revocable trust. What's the difference? Well, the living revocable trust you put in place today. You operate it today. It owns assets that you acquire or that you transfer into it. And the reason we're doing the living revocable trust is to avoid probate. The trick of the trust is it has to own the assets that you have to sign your name for. If it doesn't own all the assets that you have to sign your name for, you got to sign your name to transfer the property, the deed to the property, right? You got to sign your name to get into the bank account. You got to sign your name at the brokerage house to sell stock. You got to sign your name at the safe deposit box. You got to sign your name for all of this stuff. And you have to think, what do I have to sign my name for? So we set up the trust. It's living because you're living with it. And we moved assets into it. When you die, it actually becomes an irrevocable trust. We don't have to worry about that right now. But when you die, it avoids probate because the owner of the asset didn't die. The trick of the lawyer is to not give you a living revocable trust, to give you a testamentary trust. And I used to see this in my early days of practice all the time. I don't see it as much anymore. I'll give that to you. So the lawyer charges the same for the living revocable trust or for the testamentary trust, same cost. And you get a big trust. You get 30 pages, 20 pages, whatever it is. They look almost identical. But this testamentary trust is part of your will. If at the top it says will, you're screwed. Because the testamentary trust, testamentary means after death, right? This trust doesn't come in existence until after you die. Then we probate all of the assets using the will and the testamentary trust, and we put them all into this testamentary trust. So it guarantees the lawyer the big fee up front, plus it guarantees the lawyer all of the probate. Because the testamentary trust will not avoid probate. You got screwed. This one, the living revocable trust, will avoid probate. And I've had lawyers sit and argue with me. Testamentary trust is better than living trust. Because you set up the living trust, you've got to pay, in some states, a transfer tax when you make out a deed from you to the living trust. There is costs in some cases for funding, we call it, for putting the assets into this living revocable trust. The argument over here is, hey, you're going to pay the probate fees, you're going to pay all the fees, we can change the title at the same time, there's no additional cost. Well, yeah, there is, because you're paying the lawyer to do all of this, you're doing this on your own. So it's a huge difference. But the argument is you've got to keep track of this living revocable trust. When you buy a new car, you have to sign your name to sell your car, don't you? When you buy a new car, you forget to put it in the name of your living revocable trust. So it's probated anyway. And the attorneys argue, we're going through probate 80% of the time anyway, which is actually true. 80% of these living trusts fail because the lawyer never taught you how to use it. Now watch my YouTubes and I teach you how to use it. In fact, I've got an ebook out, it's free to you, how to use a trust. And you can just download it and get it, read it. No obligation. By the way, I don't sell emails, I don't share emails, I don't spam emails. If you're lucky, you get an email a month from me. I'm supposed to write some article that gives you a tip. I kind of don't get around to it every month, but at any rate, how to use a trust. Get that one. It'll teach you how to use this living revocable trust. I'm going to forget about the testamentary trust. Look at your trust. If it says will at the top of it in any way, you don't want it. It's a testamentary trust. You've got to have the living trust. Now, you will have a will that is a companion to the living revocable trust. It's called a pour-over will. Because if the trust screws up, aka you didn't put all your assets into it that required your signature, then we do have to probate them. And it usually isn't nearly as expensive because the cost of probate is usually based on the value of the probatable assets. Well, we got most of the assets out in the living trust. We can maybe even do a small estate probate, no big deal. But you don't want to do any of that. So make sure that you line it all up right. But this pour-over will allow any assets that you don't get into the living revocable trust to be put into the probated and then poured over into the living revocable trust after you die. So you will have a will, even though you've got a living revocable trust, but it's going to be a totally separate piece of paper. If the trust terms are part of the will, you have a testamentary trust. If the trust terms are independent, and it'll have the word revocable, living revocable in it somewhere. And you will have a will, but those two are separate documents. This is Lee Phillips, and don't forget to love us and like us and subscribe and all of that stuff. I'm talking about the difference between a testamentary trust and a living revocable trust. Big difference.